Everyone says restaurant tech means fewer jobs. The data says 94% of operators actually cut zero.
We talked with the National Restaurant Association's chief economist, Dr. Chad Moutray, about where technology actually helps restaurants hire and train faster, and the one thing automation still can't replace.
Here's a hint. Every person who walks into a restaurant, they came in to have a good time.
Stick around and watch the full episode and you'll understand.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Data Blades podcast, part of the Retail Razor podcast network, where we cut through the noise and get to the numbers that move your business forward. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm Casey Golden. Welcome to episode 12, the finale of our 3-part hiring and staffing miniseries. We've covered the labor market, the cost of being short-staffed, and how to keep your best people. Today, we tackle the big question we're all asking. Where does technology fit?
That's right. So once again, we are joined by Dr. Chad Moutray, Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Industry Research and Knowledge at the National Restaurant Association for all the answers.
This one's about using technology to hire and train faster without losing the human touch that makes hospitality work.
Now, before we dive in with Chad, a quick word about the folks who make this show and the Retail Razor podcast network possible, Retail Club. Join 2,000 retail leaders at the Retail Club AI Festival, September 22nd to 24th in Huntington Beach, where you'll dive deep into how AI is reshaping retail, all while soaking up the sun at a fully outdoor beachside venue. Decision makers from retailers and brands can attend with free tickets and up to $1,250 in travel reimbursement. Head to retailclub.com/retail-razor-podcast to learn more and get your ticket today. Casey and I will be there for the best conversations on how AI impacts customer experience and pretty much every operational part of your business. So I hope you'll join us.
If this series has been useful, hit like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star rating and review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Good Pods, so more operators can find it. It'll only take you a fraction of a second.
All right, with that out of the way, let's close out this mini-series. Here's part 3 of our deep dive into how technology helps with hiring and retaining staff with Dr. Chad Moutray, Chief Economist and SVP of Industry Research and Knowledge at the National Restaurant Association. Dr. Chad Moutray, welcome back to the Data Blades podcast. We're excited to have you back with us today to close out this fantastic 3-part series on hiring and staffing in restaurants based on your recent research insight report, Hiring and Staffing, How Onboarding, Managers, and Technology Drive Restaurant ROI.
Great to be back. Looking forward to the 3rd segment here.
Today, we're tackling the big question for restaurant operators. It's all about technology, what it can and what it can't do for your business and customer experience. So Chad, you previously gave us the rundown on your role at the National Restaurant Association as Chief Economist and Head of Industry Research. So everybody will have to tune back in to catch the background, and we're going to go ahead and dive into today's topic.
All right.
So this is the big one, what we've been waiting for. There is a real fear that automation in restaurants means fewer jobs and robots.
Yeah.
What does the data actually say?
Well, I think there's always been scary stories about how technology, the robots were taking our jobs away. If you go back 30 plus years, there was worries that spreadsheets were going to take accountants' jobs away.
Right.
And it didn't.
That's right.
And back in, again, when I was in the manufacturing world, there was worries about that. I think one of the things that we typically find is that technology, rather than displacing people, makes workers more productive, right?
Yeah.
And we live in a world where the math is very difficult for restaurants, right? The profit margins continue to get squeezed. We know the typical full service restaurant makes just 2.8%, right? Now that's the typical profit margin.
That is tight.
For limited service, it's 4%.
That's beauty.
That number's probably continuing to shrink, right? And so restaurants are looking at technology as, how can I make my workers more efficient? How can I make my operations more efficient? So whether that's using smarter purchasing power, whether it's improving overall throughput in the kitchen, right? Making sure that customer experience is improved through technology, or the purpose of this paper, speeding up the hiring process. I think all of that makes operations more efficient, helps the bottom line, but it also hopefully helps improve both the customer and the employee experience. Yes, there's a lot of scary stories out there about robots, but I think what we have typically seen, and most restaurants tell us this, it simply makes the workers more productive and efficient, right? More than anything else.
Yeah. And I think just to throw a stat out there from the paper that kind of solidifies that and validates that is 94% of operators said their tech investments over the past 2 to 3 years did not permanently eliminate jobs.
There you go.
You give the number from my paper, which is great.
I took some notes.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot of information in there.
Paper is very impressive. Like I said, like the stats are so interesting and compelling because you can go down multiple rabbit holes. You can look at what the take is on how the economy is doing, what's going to happen in commerce, what's happening in retail, what's happening in a lot of different aspects. Yeah, if I had printed the report, it would have been filled with yellow highlighter.
Exactly. So in part one, the series, when we talked about that hiring process and what's happening there, was hinted at this, but Chad, where would you say is technology delivering the clearest wins for restaurants right now? Is it in that hiring process, or are there other areas around staffing and retention and so forth where there's a lot of wins to be had?
We talked in earlier segments about the turnover rate, right? 122% is the average.
That's incredible.
But what we didn't talk about is just how easy it is to apply for jobs. Right? Not only is it easier, technology make it easier for employers to hire, it's also very easy to apply for just a ton of positions, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of competition out there when it comes to finding workers and speeding up that process. There was a stat that we did in the first paper we wrote. The typical person applies to at least 15 jobs, right? And that's, again, very easy to apply for jobs using technology.
Yeah.
You want to get that person fast, right? Because the last thing you want is I take my time and they're already across the street working elsewhere.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, they take somebody else's
and so
offer.
you want to speed that process up, but you're also dealing with the sheer volume of resumes coming your way and applications coming your way. And so that could take hours or days of time for managers, right? And so I think what technology has done is it's sped up that process, but it's also made it easier for managers. And that the bottom line is you hired managers to run the restaurant, right? And the more time they're taking in processing resumes, interviewing, that's less time that they're doing to running their restaurant. So I think technology has sped that up. So I think in the first or second segment, we talked about how manually processing all of this could take weeks, right? And we've seen examples where operators, from the time you post that position to actually hiring them, is as a matter of just a few days, right? And so that speeds up. You're eliminating some of that understaffing. But it also, I think of how people apply for jobs, right? You might be applying, maybe you're working all day long and you're applying after the kids go to bed, right? So you're applying at 1, 2, 3 in the morning or whenever you go to bed. There's not normally a manager processing that, but you could have, using technology, some type of a chatbot or something that would maybe ask you a set of questions, right? So that, again, they're not really doing major screening, but maybe just making sure that you really are qualified to apply for this role. And then they might even set up an interview for you, right? So you're already knows the manager's schedule, and you simply can place yourself on that person's calendar. You still have the human touch, right? A manager is still looking at the application, a manager is still doing the hiring, but you're using technology to help that process along to meet possible employees where they are. And I think that's a large part of why that has helped.
Yeah. What about in areas like, you mentioned, we keep coming back to this theme, that hospitality, it's fundamentally high touch. So yes, you can benefit from technology and things like the hiring process, and that's amazing. You can cut the time down from weeks to a few days. What about in areas like once you've hired someone, you're onboarding them, there's training, because ultimately you want that person out on the restaurant floor, right? So is technology helping you do those processes faster, get more efficiency without losing this human touch?
You still have a little bit of human touch in the interview process. And I think at the end of the day, you also want to make sure that that person that's interviewing for your job fits into the culture, right? And they're a great fit, right? And you've clearly sold them on what are the expectations and they're going to match.
Yeah.
Well, once that decision's been made, right? You can have and I did this even for this job, right? You do a lot of the paperwork using technology before you ever start, right? You might have some additional resources about the company or about the overall operations that can give you some guides. And so that orientation or onboarding process, some of that uses a little bit of technology. And I think even after the hire, even after that, I think you're seeing a lot of communication tools that can maybe do some surveying or ask you after a few weeks, how's it going? Is there things we can improve on? So there's ways that you can use technology to make sure that you can help that retention conversation as well. So I think all of those things matter. Maybe there's videos, right, that they can watch, right, to show them some of the operations. And so there's a lot of ways that you can use technology in that process from interview to actually starting.
Yeah.
In retail, we talk a lot about customer service, customer support. They often are used interchangeably, and I don't believe customer support and customer service are the very same thing. And customer experience can be good or bad. But I think it is interesting. Like 80% of people who open up a chat, company or a business, they're not coming there to have a good time. They're frustrated already. Where in the restaurant industry, everybody is walking through that door to have a good time.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not necessarily going to be that welcome.
Yeah.
It keeps them on the journey to have a good time, to get that customer experience at the end that your goal is.
There's that push and pull between we're in the hospitality business, but we want to have some technology that makes us more efficient and productive and hopefully people happy.
Right.
And so you have to find what is that line for you, right?
Yeah.
If you are a high touch, fancy restaurant, you want to make sure that you can use some technology maybe to help with throughput and maybe some other aspects, but you can't forget why people are coming in. Other occasions, again, I gave an example, I think in the first segment where I'm going to lunch, I'm ordering on the app, I'm going in, it's a ghost kitchen essentially, right? I don't really need as much high touch in that moment. And so finding what kind of an occasion, why are people coming to you and what kind of technology do they need, right? And so there is that push and pull, I think sometimes, and how much technology is the right amount of technology that you don't lose that overall experience.
Yeah, the report flags that leaders have to watch how employees receive these tools. So technology complements the work rather than diminishes it or displaces it.
Yeah.
What separates the operators who get that balance right?
They listen to you have to listen to your employees, right? I think I talked a lot about this in the retention segment. Communication is key, right? Knowing your employees, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are, and making sure that there's buy-in is key to that. I think the other part of it is communicating. Going back to your very first question, why are you doing this? Right? Because there is going to be that fear that, hey, they're just doing this so they can eliminate my job, or they're doing whatever else.
Right.
When you explain it in the right way to say, we're implementing this technology to hopefully make you more productive, right? To help you, right? To make the overall customer experience more pleasant, right? That, I think, when you see that rationale and it's communicated in the right way, it's not something that's a negative. It can be a positive. And so I think it all comes down to how are you communicating it and making sure the employees get that buy-in as much as possible.
I mean, a lot of times it does feel like adopting new technology is adding more work initially to reduce work in the long run. And with quick turnovers, I'm sure that narrative is a challenge.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it is when you have a lot of technology, it also might change how you're orienting people, right? So that training process might be for the new technology, or you might need to be reskilling some of your current workers on it. So training and development might change as well as part of that overall process.
Yeah, no, that's true. So if we tie the whole series together, all three parts here, we started out with a cooling labor market. We talked about the cost of being short-staffed, and then there's the challenge of keeping the people. I keep sticking back in my head, and you mentioned the 122% annual turnover. It's just amazing. Yeah. And now we've looked at the technology aspect and how are the right ways to lean on the technology to help enhance, make things more efficient and productive, but not from a perspective of replacing anyone. what would you say is the big takeaway for operators heading into the back half of 2026 from everything that we've talked about?
The good news, I think, and we talked a little bit about this in the first segment, the labor market has been pretty resilient, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean we aren't facing economic challenges, but that's a good sign, right? If you're a restaurant operator, you want a labor market that's solid, right? Because people who have jobs who are getting solid wages are going out to eat.
Right.
And it also, quite frankly, when the job market is good, you might start seeing people starting to look around, right? So it also might help. Maybe not good for you if you're losing a worker, but it's good. That means you've increased the overall pool of people who are applying. So those are all positives of things that could happen at the end of this year. As we learned earlier, understaffing is going to be a challenge regardless, right? And so finding some ways that you can, whatever that the overall economic environment in the second half of this year ends up being, that you can staff appropriately and quickly and make sure you get the right people in the door is going to be key.
Thank you, Chad, for an incredible series. I'm loving these discussions. We went from labor market challenges to all the cost operators need to think about for short staffing, hiring, retention, and how tech can help or hurt you. I hope our audience has been enjoying the conversation as much as I am, but I loved the stats. You guys got to download the report.
Oh, there's so much information in there.
Half the afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, well, absolutely.
You are an economist, and maybe you didn't know it, I guess.
Maybe.
There you go. Yeah, and I keep coming back to what I'm going to think of it as one of our big takeaways, that hospitality is a people business, right? That human side is what drives success for every operator. And technology, automation, all these things are great at augmenting capabilities, but they're not really designed to replace that human touch. It's still a people first industry, and I think that's what makes it work.
Well said.
Yeah. So Chad, if anyone wants to get more information, I think like Casey's super enthusiastic about the data in the report because she's our resident data junkie, an economist at heart. Where would you tell people to go if they want to really dig into the report and learn more?
You can go to the National Restaurant Association's website, which is www.restaurant.org, or you can always go to LinkedIn and Twitter, either on the NRA's page or myself.
All right. Great.
Amazing. And we'll also include it to our show notes and have links to that report. Such a pleasure. And we'll be looking forward to having you back in the near future.
That sounds fun.
Appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
We're a wrap.
All right.
Great.
Love this episode? Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Good Pods. And if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe before you go. I'm Casey Golden.
Follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram, and subscribe to our Substack for highlights and bonus content. For transcripts and guest info, visit retailrazor.com. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us on the Retail Razor Data Blades, part of the Retail Razor Podcast Network.
Until next time, stay sharp, be data-driven, and harness AI. This is the Retail Razor Data Blades.